Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Empower Performance Podcast. We have a very special guest. It's my cousin, Jared Miller. He actually was a huge inspiration for me getting into this field. And when I wanted to transition from being a soccer coach into strength and conditioning, he was definitely an amazing resource. Jared, if you don't mind explaining your athletic background and your career so far, just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. Jared Miller. I'm from Fredericksburg, Virginia, but I've been living in Europe for the past 13 years. In the States, I followed an athletic training background at James Madison University, where I did my undergrad, where I was sports medicine background. And then I went to Michigan State University for my master's in athletic training. Again, both of those things were more on the medical side and experiencing it in, I guess you could consider a club setting or a university setting. And from there, I went to the New York Jets for a year. I was a seasonal assistant athletic trainer. And after that year, I moved to the Netherlands and started my career here at a private practice clinic, PhysioMed, where I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of soccer players. I'm going to mix this up the entire time we have the conversation because I've been here so long, I call it football now, but
I say
it
football
might
as well.
it, it might confuse our American listeners.
Audience. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I've been working with soccer players for 13 years. And yeah, I transitioned more when I moved here, more to the strength conditioning side of things as well. It was kind of a natural evolution for me, where
Mm.
in the US, of course, with my background, you have the exercise science background, physics. You take strength conditioning courses with part of the education that you have in athletic training and sports medicine. And that actually, when I got here, that's what really stimulated me a little bit more, was more interesting for me. And I saw, especially in the Netherlands, there was kind of lack of really good strength conditioning education. It's not like in the United Kingdom or Australia or the US, where there's a really strong university system that helps trainers and performance coaches become educated. Here, it's a little bit more the Wild West in the Netherlands and in a lot of parts of Europe, and what kind of education that you can receive. So the education that I had from JMU and from MSU already was quite strength and conditioning heavy relative to a lot of the professionals here. And that being said, there's a lot of professionals that go abroad and get their education elsewhere. But it was, like I said, it was a bit of a natural evolution for me also because I'm not a physical therapist, and by law in the Netherlands, I can't practice physical therapy. So I had to kind of reinvent myself when I moved here. And I'm in a practice with 35 plus physios. So I transitioned to more of that rehab trainer and performance trainer as time went on, and a lot less hands-on the treatment table and a lot more in the gym, focusing on that part of rehab and extending on into performance as I continued to understand more about that side of things.
I think so. There's two different directions I want to go with that. One is I had a guest on recently. She moved from Germany, where she's originally from, to the United States, and was talking about the difference culturally between just the athletic side of things and how even like she's a track athlete. She says that you might have to go to like track clubs, specifically in Germany, where there might be few and far between. But then every high
Mhm.
school year has a track.
Yeah,
Every high school has a very developed track team, or at least relative to Germany. So
mhm,
comparing like Europe to the United States, there's definitely a huge difference with infrastructure, attention,
for
all that kind
sure.
of stuff. And then, as far as being able to speak both languages, I've had fortunately a few physical therapists on the podcast who also get their CSCS. They work in that kind of like in between space, and I feel that for a long time. This is a subject I've touched on a few times now on this podcast. There seemed to be such a huge divide between the traditional 3 by 10 clamshell spurred dog sort of physical therapist,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
then your strength coach, where it might just be not to insult anybody, but a meathead who just does the powerlifting stuff, but doesn't understand conditioning, mobility, speed, power, some of these different aspects for athletic development. I think that a true performance coach should always keep the sport in mind at the end. It's not just, improving the squat, bench, and deadlifts and saying, look, I justified that I'm a good coach because they're stronger, but then maybe doesn't translate the best to performance. But then I also find that the bridge or the divide between physical therapy and performance training is definitely reduced, if in some cases non-existent whatsoever. And I think,
Mhm.
and you can certainly speak to this because return to play is something that you certainly have specialty in, and you can speak both languages. But I find that proper rehabilitation should just be a very gradual progression through everything, where you don't necessarily know where the rehab stops and the
Yeah,
performance training
exactly.
begins. So if you can kind of speak to that, the benefit of having your original background in performance training, how has that benefited you in your career?
Yeah, you said it exactly. I view it as a continuum. Where does the
Mhm,
rehab start and the performance training begins? It was a pretty clear line when I was in the US. I mean, in the medical side of things, we got the injured body part functionally ready to return back to the strength conditioning side. And that's actually where I felt like I was missing in my rehab an understanding of how to get somebody fully and actually truly fit and ready for
mhm,
performance again. Because we once, for example, the ankle was functionally ready to be able to do change of direction tasks and be able to apply force into it in just a very basic way. Then we transition them to the strength conditioning coaches. And there was actually not a lot of overlap and communication between the two. Like we kind of said, okay, we've done our part, we checked our boxes functionally.
mhm,
And okay, now the strength conditioning takes over and actually continues two-thirds of the rehab. Now, what I've been doing in my current role is I'm finishing rehabs now,
mhm,
and I'm going from even the physios that I work with, they're doing the first third of the rehab, getting the athlete and the body part functionally ready, and then I'm getting them more ready with the qualities that are necessary for return to play and return
mhm,
to performance. So yeah, I completely agree with you. My background, like I said before, in medical, maybe it gives me a little bit better understanding of biomechanics or like tissue adaptation, the recovery process of injured tissue, and that in Michigan State, I studied a little bit more manual therapy as well. So I have a little bit better understanding maybe than average of pelvic control and these kind of things, how SI
mhm,
joints function. But in general, yeah, I just learned going on further throughout my career that there is really no cutoff point. There shouldn't be. And if you think in black and white like that, then you're really doing the athlete a disservice, and
mhm,
you're also limiting yourself and what you can do. That being said, you do see a lot of people in the profession now that are kind of doing a whole one man shop kind of thing, where they're doing
mhm,
everything from treatment and rehabilitation all the way up to performance training. And I would caution against that because, yeah, you got to be an expert in something. If you can't be an expert in everything. So that's also why I transitioned away from the treatment table, because I have colleagues that are doing that all day long and they're
mhm,
the best in what they do. And it didn't speak to me the same way. I really gradually shifted towards what I really enjoy doing and where I could find the most impact and in my way connect with the players the best and get results that I'm interested in getting for myself and the players. But that's the danger now also, is that you see a lot of one man shops, especially in the third party sphere where I'm working. If you're talking about working in a club setting, the clubs still do a very good job of delineation between your physios, your sports masseuse, your on-field rehab trainer, your performance coaches. They still delineate that well, depending on the club, of course, and the size staff which they have. But when you look at the Netherlands, there's only a few big clubs in the Netherlands which actually can afford to staff that many people. The majority of the clubs in the Netherlands, they have to have these kind of hybrid roles,
mhm,
or they just have people doing things which they're not really qualified for, they're not
mhm,
comfortable doing. But that's also what gives us our business, is because that's where we've profiled ourselves to be able to
mhm,
help players who might not get the most attention or quality that they want at a club. Because yeah, let's face it, I was in a club also. You don't have time for all those players. You're focused mostly on just the players that are fit, trying to keep them on the field, and you don't have time for a long-term rehab a lot of the times.
mhm.
So that's where us as in a third party sector, where we find a lot of our business is through that kind of dynamic.
Do you mind speaking to perhaps some of the difficulties of the private sector in terms of maybe
Yeah, yeah.
scheduling periodization around the schedule of the athletes, for example, or the expectation of the club?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and you see it, I've seen it now in every sort of situation. You have it where you have very good communication with a club and you're
Mhm,
speaking almost daily with the physio or the strength coach at a club to ensure that you really align with your work and the periodization which they're following it from a club role. But then you also see clubs which are very closed off to the idea of third party work. At the end of the day, we don't work for the clubs; we work for the athletes. So a lot of
mhm,
times we have to do it kind of anonymously, where the athlete isn't communicating and we're not communicating with the club because of that, which is something I really don't like to do, because you're basically just flying blind. In that case, I'm much more conservative with my approach to the athlete, of course,
mhm,
because I don't have the full information. I have a general idea of how their week periodization will look, but I don't have their metrics. I don't have any idea what their true load is day in and day out. So that's a massive challenge in this
mhm,
sector, is just not having full information And then also having sometimes the expectations from the players or from the agents that I'm end responsible for the end result, where I only have maybe 5% of the load of
Mhm,
the week that he's doing. And I have
mhm,
no control over how the club decides to load him or not load him. So that it's always on your feet, improvising, very dynamic. I could have a full plan written out, but that day at the club, they change their program as well. Then I have to really
mhm,
think fast on my toes. How am I going to adapt my session that I'm not overloading? You have to think completely differently than if you're working at a club. At a club, you have control of the periodization to an
mhm,
extent. You also have pressures of the head coach or of the board of directors, or a lot of pressures as well being at a club, but more or less you have control over your own periodization at a club. Here it's almost exactly the opposite. For the only time we have control over the periodization is in the rehabs, where we're doing full-time work with the players
mhm.
day in and day out. But yeah, that's also what makes it challenging and exciting, and that's the fun part of it as well.
The closest that I can, relate to with that is that, like, if I work with an athlete, maybe it's a high school athlete, it's what their sport coaches would be doing, kind of behind the
Yeah.
scenes, especially in season or preseason. So you hear that, like, I worked with a wrestler, and he would do 2-a-days even in season, sometimes,
Mhm.
which I think is, fairly negligent, but then he also had
Mhm.
his wrestling club and his high school coaches, so sometimes that would add to the load, and then he said that, like, "Oh, like, I'm really sore today." I was like, "What happened?" He's like, "Yesterday at wrestling, the buyout after 2-hour wrestling practice was 100 pull-ups. Like, you're not allowed to
Mhm.
leave until you do 100 pull-ups."
Yeah.
"Can you do 100 pull-ups?" He's like, "No." Like, "I know he can't do 100 pull-ups." So he said that the coach is basically bicep curling him, but said you're not
Mhm.
allowed to let go of the bar until you've done your 100 pull-ups. And to me, that's just, like, grossly negligent,
Yeah.
all in the name of, mental toughness or whatever. And it's interesting too, culturally, because this is definitely a different topic that I want to discuss was conditioning. I find that some sports value conditioning so much and could benefit from more strength work, and then other
Mhm.
sports, it may be more strength work and not so much emphasis on conditioning. I know when we're talking about soccer players, there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, generally speaking, in strength qualities.
Mhm.
When I see some clips of, I don't want to name specific clubs, but some of the best clubs in the world doing strength training with their athletes, you see them doing some crazy things on booster balls with bands, and it's like, I don't know how you're getting any stimulus from this. It just feels like a time wasting session. It feels like it's just
Mhm.
adding fatigue, but for very little actual progression. So, yeah, I guess to speak to that is, I can understand it'd be a challenge. And then sometimes they're actually getting into service. They might think, oh, we have better staff in house, and that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, that definitely seems like it'd
Yeah.
be a challenge trying to find the balance between a game time. Also, we could talk about how the schedules of a professional soccer player, I think, is coming to if not already, has gotten to a point of like no return in terms of the game is far less tactical and technical. I find that it's just a lot of sprinting volume. There's more games. There's more competitions. I don't think we need a nations league. I don't think we need whatever. But I just feel like there's so many
Uh,
competitions. Preseasons, off seasons are shorter, preseasons are longer, they're traveling all around the world. I don't know, so I'm
mhm.
sure you can speak to the complexity of all that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, right now it's just a metrics game. Like when their clubs are looking to add new players, they're not even looking at their technical qualities sometimes
Mhm,
anymore. They're just looking at their metrics. How much high speed meters are they doing in the game? How many kilometers are they running in the game? Everything has become so metrics oriented in terms of evaluating players. And yeah, like you said, match congestion is going through the roof. You have sometimes 3 games in a week. And so, yeah, the load management, also clubs have to find a way to adapt to this new cycle, and a lot of them cannot. And you see waves of injuries coming through. Yeah, and you see, I'll go back to one of your previous points, is that some of these Bosu ball, elastic band, eccentric overload, yo-yo stuff. You see that every country seems to have their own style of training. You
mhm.
see, that was probably a Spanish or an Italian
Yes,
club
it
that you
sure
were
was.
watching, and you see that. I mean, there's guys that I work with and from that are working in Spain, and these are the expectations that I have. This is what their work is going to look like. If I go to guys working in the Premier League, you know that they're going to have a better base of strength conditioning knowledge,
Mhm,
and that's just more of their philosophy. In
mhm,
Italy, you know, they're just going to have the guys run, 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 run. They don't want to kill their legs with strength work. So
mhm,
you got some of the biggest clubs in Italy that refuse to do any strength work at all because they want to save the players' legs to be able to get the metrics needed by the head coach, which we all know that have any understanding of strength work, how that can be very detrimental for a player that's just
mhm,
only playing football, only playing soccer, and not doing strength-based work in the gym. So, and but it's you see, it's like I said, it's the Wild West out here.
mhm,
In the US, that it's much more standardized. You know what you're going to get in terms of, you're going to have strength conditioning, university educated guys in those positions, and they're going to be following, yeah, NSCA regulations. They're going to be all kind of developed from the same cloth, cut from the same cloth, if you will.
mhm,
Here, yeah, like it runs the gamut from the level of knowledge, understanding, quality, philosophy. It's everywhere you look. You might be at a Premier League club, but they have a Portuguese staff, so they bring in their Portuguese strength conditioning trainers, and then the what you would expect from a Premier League club no longer looks like Premier League style work.
Mhm.
So it's every single club, every single season, even half season could change every time. You have to be constantly adapting. Also, the way that your understanding of what your athlete is receiving from the club. But it's yeah, like I said, it's challenging. It's fun.
I think speaking to, like, the Italian situation that you're talking about where they just run players into the ground, but then they don't lift weights to spare their legs, I think that's just such a backwards way of looking at things. I
Certainly.
think that I mean, just understanding the difference between intensity and volume, but that you can actually do very high intensity, low volume, spare the legs, train the nervous system a bit more, maybe get different adaptations as opposed to people think that like I hear all the time, "Oh, I don't wanna lift heavy weights and get big muscles," and it's like, I don't know, you find some sleeper builds in powerlifting because they're very efficient technically and they, their nervous system is so efficient and powerful, and then you find bodybuilders are the ones that actually do the most volume, and then they have huge muscles and stuff like that. So I don't think
Hmm.
that people understand that that's how that works. I think it's always heavy weights equals big muscles. It's
Yep.
not inherently incorrect, but I think there's a bit of nuance that people are missing there. And then the
No,
same thing with,
certainly.
like, the Bosu ball bandit stuff is I've never seen a Bosu ball on a football pitch, so I don't know if that's necessarily the
Exactly.
best yeah, I don't think that's the best way to go about training. I was gonna say as well, going along those lines, so we can talk about microdosing, for example, because you do have such a difficult job. Do you
Mhm.
have to do sometimes microdosing, miniature sessions, multiple sessions a day, training different qualities? How do you go about that?
Yeah, certainly. Almost all the work I do in season with players, especially when they're fit and following a full club program, is essentially microdosing. I usually have a strength quality emphasis, so
Mhm,
we might be focusing more on sub max strength. I'm very rarely doing maximal strength work with the guys in season. That being said, I'm pushing close to maximum strength, but I'm
mhm,
not doing 1 RMs and these kind of things with
gotcha.
footballers in season. So I'll have an emphasis like that, but then I really rely on contrast training. I've found that that's extremely effective for the small amount of microdosing that we can do. And I'm very big on if I'm going to give you a strength quality, such as sub maximum strength, that you have to be able to translate that into something that's more specific to what you need to be doing on the pitch.
Mhm,
So contrast training allows me to be able to get them into more functional exercises, focusing on more speed reps or focusing on more just body weight, but full speed, transitioning from a squat like position
mhm,
into a rotation. I call them athletic skills. So I
mhm,
couple athletic skills such as like high speed running. There's
mhm,
also athletic skill that is coupled with that. You have to be able to produce vertical force in the ground and be able to have rhythm and timing. And these are all skills that you can develop. And you can focus on that vertical force production in a explosive strength or a speed strength action or a
mhm,
sub maximal strength action as well. And instead of overloading on massive amounts of sets and reps on one action, microdosing a few series and put 4 exercises into a superset that all complement each other. And I found to get pretty good results from that. And it doesn't overly tax the nervous system as well when we're keeping the volumes low. And I'm never doing high volume work in season because you can't. Match congestion is killing us. So, yeah, my focus when I can do strength work is to try to combine those things into one session because I might only get one session a week with a player, if that.
sure. Along those lines, there's a basketball coach who's regarded quite highly in our field, Corey Schlesinger. He worked with the Phoenix Suns, he worked with, Texas, all sorts of big, big names and all that stuff, and he was the first person that I saw really talking about microdosing, but he also talked about, like, the high-low model and how he incorporated both together, where if he worked with basketball players, NBA players, for example, he said it'd be kind of unwise on a travel day where it might be a recovery day for them to then train them really hard and then go into a basketball
Mhm.
day where they would do a lot of volume just from basketball, the sport itself. As some people are sometimes unaware of, the sport is a massive stimulus. And so he said he would actually sometimes get people to do almost potentiation before a game or get like
Mhm.
their strength work after a game.
Mhm.
And then you'd actually let the travel days be a little bit more movement based. Is that something that
Yeah.
you take into consideration with your athletes, for example?
Yeah, certainly. Again, we have to talk about the match weeks and the
Uh-huh.
match congestion. If they have 3 matches in a week, for example, they're not
Mhm,
going to really get strength work in. If
mhm,
we have like a Sunday, Thursday match, then on the Monday early match day +1, we're trying to get the strength work in with the similar idea is that we're trying to couple that big load moment in the week from the match and from your strength work so that
mhm.
you can recover by the time Thursday match. If I have a one match week, I still am trying to have them get their match day plus one work in, which is focused solely on slow, heavy work, and then a little bit of complementary things, of course. And
Mhm,
then on your match day, what is it, -3, so 3 days before the match,
mhm,
then we're focusing on a little bit more speed and explosive strength, working more on those skills where they can really adapt and acquire those skills. Because
mhm,
a match day plus one, you're not going to be adding new skills. Your coordination's not going to be able to really stick.
mhm,
So that's basically when I'm doing my work is on a plus one or a -3. If it's a -2, for example, the volume is super low. We're just working on really short, sharp plyos, getting those skills in again, but almost picking up no weights at all at that point. But again, every week is different. Every athlete is different, what they can
mhm.
tolerate. And I have guys that can tolerate so much and I have to really slow them down. And I have other guys that really can't tolerate, or at least mentally can't tolerate a lot and really have to kind of push them to their limit. So every athlete's different, as you know.
It's definitely a fun subject to touch on because, well, one of the first things I learned the hard way was after my college career. I learned about like just very basic, principles. General adaptation syndrome was like eye opening for me. I wish I knew about it in college. I just thought like the work is what gets you better, but it's actually the recovery to the work that gets you better. And so I
Yeah.
felt that I had way too much of a stimulus and way too little recovery, all things considered. I might get 5 hours a night. I might eat a lot, but it's not necessarily enough, for the amount of calories that I was burning. We would have 2 or 3 games a week. We would have 3 or 4 practices a week. I would go to the gym at, like, midnight. I got had, there's a gym in town. The guy gave me the keys to his gym. It was like a Rocky Balboa style gym. I'd go at, like,
Nice.
midnight, and it was almost like therapy for me. And then I would do, like, 3 extra skill sessions a week, and I was always tired, always fatigued. My performance was way worse than it would have been had I actually, like, recovered properly.
Yeah,
I could have done less work and taken more naps and had an extra sandwich a day. Maybe my performance
for
would have been
sure.
much, much better. And it's something that was, like, a difficult thing, especially in, like, hustle culture, American culture sometimes where it's like more is more, but sometimes less is more. But you're talking about
Yeah.
the tolerance of athletes, and I find that soccer is such a unique sport. I wanted to say football, but we'll say soccer for the American audience. Soccer is such a unique sport because you can have in the NBA, you don't have too many little guys. You don't have too many people that aren't freakishly athletic. But in soccer, you might have an Iniesta where
Mhm,
he's so intelligent and so technical that he's able to solve the problem without pure physicality. And then on the flip side, you
mhm.
might have a Lukaku who's just a behemoth. He could have played
Yeah.
American football, for example, and maybe he doesn't need as much skill or creativity to come up with a solution. And players can leverage that. In theory, the best athlete would be able to have both ends at the highest level. But
Mhm,
to me, I've always thought of athleticism as the ability to learn or adapt, or the ability to solve a problem by whatever means you need necessary. Messi is the greatest player of all time, and he's not renowned for his physicality, although he is able to tolerate a lot because his injury record over 20 years is remarkable. But you're talking
mhm,
about that. You might find some kids coming through the academies these days might be, like you're talking about, they're looking at metrics, more physically dominant than some of the older vets from the generation past, where they might be
mhm,
able to get away with the right pass at the right time and scanning and stuff like that. I guess the question is people talk about minimum effective dose. There's also maximal effective dose, which I think matters more in the off season. How much stress
mhm,
can you throw at these people? How do you get through to these people mentally, like you're talking about, to not be scared of adaptation, to not be scared of weight, to not be scared of intensity? Because I see that at least in like a rehab setting. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't want to push too hard. And it's like, okay, well, you can be frail forever. And then maybe you recover to 80%, you go back to your sport, it's chaotic, it's violent, get injured again. I guess,
mhm.
how do you work with the mental side, whether it's in a rehab context or just performance context, to break through the people
Yeah.
that they should work hard?
Yeah, I that's one luxury I have in my setting is that guys that are here want to be here most of the time. So you break through that barrier pretty quick when you're working at a club. You kind of have guys that are in the gym because they have to be, not because they want to be. Yeah, but that being said, it's again, every person is different, and for me it's about gradual exposure. Like
Mhm,
I'm not going to just give them a session and just kill them on the first day. I want them to get a bit of confidence in a rehab or in a performance way where they get slowly exposed to different things that maybe they're not used to, slowly exposed to things that they're not comfortable doing, but
mhm,
that creates comfort in the end. In the rehab setting, we talk about apprehension all the time. That
mhm,
apprehension has to go away through gradual exposure. Guys need to see, okay, I can do these things that
mhm,
I haven't done in 6 months maybe, and I don't have pain doing it. But those are all things that you're just coaching them through it. And I don't want to focus too much on asking them, do you have pain or is
uh-huh,
this challenging for you? I want them to experience it themselves. If they have feedback from me, they give it. But I'm not somebody that wants to get a lot of bias in the system by asking, hey, how does that feel? Is that painful? Hey, is this weight too heavy for you or is this weight good for you? Like these kind of things. I want to let the athlete really experience that for themselves and then they can communicate with me. That's what I tell them. them, I said, always communicate with me. If you're feeling something, you talk to me. If
Mhm,
it's good, if it's bad, talk to me. Because that's actually, for me, the best way to coach is let the athlete give you their input and their feedback. It also, you get more buy-in from the player. And when they're experiencing it for themselves and they have these revelations for themselves, it's better than you just feeding them information.
mhm,
Like, see, now you're getting stronger. Oh, look, this rep was better than the last rep.
mhm,
If I'm telling them that, yeah, great. But if they're feeling that,
mhm,
even better. So for me, that's I think a good way to help with mental buy-in and getting them through difficult spots in a rehab or in a performance trajectory. And a lot of times, guys just like to know what kind of stuff I've seen before. So they're just
mhm,
asking, "Hey, have you seen a player like me with this type of injury? Did he did he get back to it? Is this normal for me?"
mhm,
And so normalizing it helps them a lot because
mhm,
it's a new situation for them. They might not have been injured before. They might not have been in playing in the Premier League before at such a high level. So they ask, "Hey, you worked with this guy. How did he work? How did he think about it? Or how did he experience it? Is this normal how I'm thinking about it or how I'm dealing with it?" So players really look a lot towards each other. That's also nice in our setting is that we have a lot of players rehabbing at the same time together. So they also
mhm,
kind of form that sort of bond and support of each other. We have players even after they both go their separate ways to different they're still friends and they're still contacting each other and saying, "Hey, how's your knee doing? Hey, yeah, my ankle's doing well, yeah." So it's it's like a clubhouse setting.
mhm. So I guess 2 ways, to respond to that. One of them was just talking about the mental side of things in the beginning. I found that with clients, some people you do have to hold back because they're just gonna be animals no matter what you do, and you get really fortunate with those people, and those are actually the dream clients, and other ones you wanna push a little bit.
Mhm,
But you're talking about comfort. Sometimes I have to change my word choice because if I say, "Do you wanna add 10 pounds?" They'll say, "No, I'm good," 'cause they always wanna
mhm,
stay, like, well within their comfort zone, and growth doesn't occur inside their comfort zone. So
mhm,
then I say, "Do you think you could add 10 pounds or plan to try adding 10 pounds or something like that?" Maybe just like the little word choice makes a difference. But some of those
mhm,
clients that just add 10 pounds, they say, "Hey, I think you can do this." And then,
mhm.
I almost have to
Yeah.
skip them in that instance because if not, then we're gonna be in the same spot forever, and they're not paying me to stay in the same spot.
Yeah,
So,
exactly, and in your
yeah.
coach's eye, you can see if they need 10 extra pounds or not, and
Mhm.
if something looks too easy, obviously, then, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
We're spending too much time, and are we getting the adaptation we want if everything is so easy for you? So we have to challenge the system in order to change it, right?
I think the thing I tell people is that it takes a fair amount of effort to, like, do a 6 or 7 out of 10 as opposed to 8 or 9 out
Mhm,
of 10. I know that this isn't exactly perfect if you're using RPE, but maybe you don't get the
mhm,
same adaptation out of both things. I'm like, if it's gonna suck no matter what, you might as well get something out of it.
mhm.
So that sometimes helps
Certainly.
people with intent. If you're gonna do sprints and you're gonna do throws, for example, if you throw at 80, 90%, you might not actually be getting the adaptation you're looking for because you should be pushing 100%, getting lots of rest. And if you just try to rush through it and you're doing like a I don't know, a throw against the wall or something like that, you're throwing 80%, you just rush through all the reps. What's the point of that? It's time
Mhm,
wasting. You're gonna get tired for it, but you're not gonna get what you're actually looking for out of it. So I do try to relay the actual benefit of the exercise or the purpose behind the exercise to everything. Hopefully that drives intent. Sometimes you
mhm,
gotta motivate people in other ways. One of my favorite stories was, when I had my internship at a strength and conditioning facility in Cincinnati. It's mostly working with high school athletes and middle school athletes, and there's this one so lots of, like, a mix of, like, boys and girls working there, and the girls were a lot less violent on med ball throws than the guys. The guys wanted to, like, throw louder than the other person up against a concrete wall or something like that. This girl's doing med ball slams, and she's basically just dropping the ball from an overhead position, and I was trying to get intent out of her, so I was just like, "Is there anybody at school that you don't like?" She's like, "Yes, absolutely," and I was like, "Imagine their faces on the ground." The girl's like,
mhm.
"Ah," and she's, like, slamming the ball full power. Whatever you gotta do
Yeah.
to get the intent out of somebody, I think is cool. But going back
Yeah,
to
but
the
that's sorry, I wanna interrupt you, because that's really external versus internal cueing, isn't it?
sure.
And, like, that's, like, a big topic nowadays is,
Mhm,
like, how can we avoid so much internal cueing
mhm,
and get the more external cueing? Because of course, sports is so external. You're not focused internally what you're doing in on a
sure.
sporting field. So that's really it, and there's massive conversations, as you know, about internal versus external cueing, but that's also something that I still continue to find challenging to this day, as how can I make it more my cueing more external than
Mhm,
internal? And that's something, that I think that we should continue to focus on for sure.
mhm. Anytime I hear, like, a little analogy that just, like, helps, I'll do it. So, for example, with, like, rotation, if I wanna create, like, dissociation between the rib cage and the pelvis, I might say something like,
Mhm,
"You have a laser pointer on your belt buckle. Keep
mhm,
that facing forward the whole time, and you have a GoPro, and I want you to get a panoramic." And then sometimes people
mhm,
will just understand that concept alone, because otherwise you
mhm.
just see them rotating the hips the entire time, and they look like
Yeah.
a salsa dancer, and I don't wanna see that. But I wanted to go back to what you're talking about, people wanting to hear about other people's recoveries. because I know that I would imagine, especially for a professional athlete, it's their livelihood. It's got to be even more stressful to get injured. You
Mhm.
get 2 or 3
Yeah.
injuries in a row. You don't know if you're going to get cut, if you're going to be sold, what it does to your career, if you'll ever be able to play the same again. It's your passion as well. But I think something that's important is I had a guest on the podcast. His name is Alex Sterner. If you follow him, he's a strength coach, playing combat sports, jiu-jitsu. He was talking about how, well, combat sports, there's lots of injuries, just the nature of it, the violence of it. And he was talking about
Mhm.
how you shouldn't necessarily fear-monger injuries, like the whole idea of injury prevention and some of the gurus that say, "You use my system, you'll never get hurt. Use someone else's system, you'll get hurt," is such a disservice. And to teach people that injuries do happen, but in that process, you can still work everything else that's healthy, which is
Mhm.
empowering. And then you can also, like, I tore my MCL a little over a year ago, and
Mhm.
I got injured as well in high school. I handled the high school injury way worse because I looked at what I couldn't do, and that really bummed
Mhm.
me out. But then with the MCL more recently, I almost look at it as a challenge. Is like 3 months to rehab. I got it done in 2. I was like, "How quickly can I rehab?" It's like in the
Mhm.
beginning, it's like, okay, I just have to work on full extension and a little bit of flexion and all that stuff. I was like going crazy with that as much as I possibly could. And then in the meantime, I might do like a one leg RDL or like a step up on the good leg and then just do, upper body core the same as I would
Mhm.
before. And I just feel that it was really empowering to look glass half full as much as possible and to focus on what I could do. And I think it's important, I guess, in your context, to share with athletes that yes, other people have come back from this. Yes, you can do this. Injuries are a part of life. Let's not act like it's the worst thing in the world. It sucks. And anytime I get hurt, I hate it, right? But I guess it helps to tell people this is real, but you can recover. Your body is resilient, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that even more building on that is like now is your opportunity to really work on all your weaknesses that you didn't have time to when you were fit. I mean, you have so much time in a rehab to work on yourself in every small
Mm,
detail. I mean, we spend so much time improving everywhere else, as you said, really from the intrinsic foot muscles, hip stabilizers, flexibility, all of these things that they don't really have time to focus on or
right.
they don't want to focus on. Now they understand the importance of those things and it's also going to help contribute to a healthy comeback for them. And it's a lot of times a blessing in disguise for players because they come in and they were athletes, but they weren't that athletic. As you
Mhm,
said, you've been talking about it. So then we can help them improve other qualities which they never thought were important, or maybe things that contributed to their injury in the beginning. And our goal is to have guys come back more athletic than when they started or before
right.
they were injured. Yeah. It's long-term rehab. That's a massive amount of time to be able to improve things. So yeah, if you just coach guys the right way and get them in that mindset, then they really embrace the process as well.
Mhm. I was gonna ask, getting more into the specifics of how you work with athletes, what is almost like not necessarily a formula, but how would you look at all the demands that you need to meet for athletes? How would you try to spread it out over the course of a week? Let's say in the long-term sort of plan, not necessarily in season where it'd be a lot more difficult to work on multiple
Mhm.
qualities. And then also,
Mhm.
I know you're talking about, like, testing between limbs, for example. What are some of the tests that you like to use or technology that you find value in? Before I say this,
Mhm.
I would say that there's a lot of places that will use technology the wrong way. And what I mean by that is they use it to sell that, "Oh, we're so much smarter because we technically have science to back this," or they just
Right.
use it to show the before and after, be like, "Look, you got better." But you coulda
Mhm.
gotten better without the the before and after showing the proof and
Mm,
all that stuff. So, I mean, I have
for
a
sure.
VBT device, I have a jump device, I have a speed watch.
Mhm,
The jump
mhm,
device and the speed watch is great for intent and just, like, actually tracking and getting information if my programming's working.
mhm.
VBT for me, I know there's value in it, but for me, it's just like a fun toy. I don't use it to
Yeah, for
inform
sure.
decisions that much, so yeah, I was go
Yeah,
ahead.
VBT, like, it's also nice sometimes for the athletes to get some feedback and just to get
Mhm,
an understanding of how much intent really feels like and
right,
objectively. But yeah, going back to your question, yeah, we're using also force plates, a lot of
mhm,
stuff from Vald, force frames, finding limb symmetry indexes. I'm a fan of functional movement screening, not for the scoring, but literally for the movement screening to see where they
mhm,
have compensations or they're restricted. We're looking at what else? Sometimes we're using biodex, not so frequently anymore because I've moved a little bit away from that. And just like I said, a lot of things looking at different limb symmetry index when it comes to a rehab setting. And in the performance sphere as well, we have our force dex, we're looking at reactive strength index, single leg reactive strength index, these kind of things, rigidity impulse in the ankles. I'm not doing so much performance testing
mhm,
anymore because
mhm,
I'm not primarily responsible for performance within
mhm,
the setting which I'm in, only in the off season. But then again, that's just a baseline to try to set some goals for the off season, which is only 4 weeks long in
mhm,
soccer, if that, because they go on holiday too. So we get sometimes 2 weeks with a player.
mhm.
So a lot of goal setting from that side of things is really challenging. Sorry, what was the first question? Not the testing part?
So I was getting more into the specifics of how you would go about perhaps attacking all the different physical qualities to prepare somebody. because,
Yeah.
it wouldn't just be strength and it wouldn't just be conditioning. There'd be all the other factors that go into it. I know you talked about, like, your skill development, coordination, stuff like that as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, and that's actually where I can serve sometimes the most value because these are things where typically at the club they're not getting that attention to detail that I'm able to provide. And just being in the business for a long time now, my coach's eye for these kind of athletic skills and foot placement and being able to, yeah, the biomechanics as I described earlier. These are the things that I feel like I can add a lot of value to in a program. Like I said, they're not really getting that when they're in a group setting. So a lot of times when I can't do any lifting at all, I'll focus primarily on that flexibility, lumbopelvic stability, looking
Mhm,
at all the risk factors from hamstring strains. As you know, in soccer, that's one of the
mhm,
biggest injuries, and trying to find ways outside of traditional strength work and really taxing the player
mhm,
where I can make a difference. And that's for me sometimes the only work I can do. Like I said, there's a lot of guys that I don't do any strength work at all. I just improve their movement quality, their change of
mhm,
direction mechanics, their sprinting mechanics, and that already has them performing better because they're functioning more optimally. Again, and I view my role, even when I'm doing performance training, as injury prevention because they just have to
mhm,
be able to tolerate the demands of sports. And
mhm,
like we said, sport is getting more physical, more fast, more explosive, so what is being asked of the players is much more. So performance training is essentially just preventing them from getting injured in those
mhm.
demands. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to break down. They won't be robust enough if they don't have those underpinning qualities that are going to help them be quote faster, stronger, more explosive. They'll break down, especially when they have so much match congestion. So that's really my approach to everything is just injury prevention, which and I heard one coach say that the best indicator of performance is just availability. Is the
Oh,
player available?
yeah.
And that's if you can keep your players available, then you're doing something very well because let them shine through with their natural talent and ability as well, just by keeping them fit.
I definitely wanna go, 2 directions with that as well. You say a lot of good stuff. I wanna talk about the mechanics and how that can actually, like, have an influence on somebody, but then I also wanna be sure to talk about, there's almost like this difference between, just working up to the level of being able to survive your sport, availability, and then can you get the performance gains after that? Can you get a little faster? Can you jump a little higher? Whatever that might be. But availability is certainly the most important thing, and you can't help your team if you're injured all the time. And then also with sports becoming increasingly athletic, I think that bar is essentially like high performance is just surviving at this point. If it's something
Yeah.
like, I don't want to disparage pickleball, but the demands for pickleball might be significantly lower than playing a Premier League match, right?
Yeah,
And so
certainly.
the level, the bare minimum that you need to just not get hurt doing pickleball might be way lower than it would be uh, until you cross over into, okay, now my pickleball performance is improving. But with soccer, at the professional level, 3 games a week, with how physical it is, yeah, I mean, you got to have pretty elite athleticism to even get into the point where you are passing that barrier of just surviving the game and the
Mhm,
demands of the game.
mhm,
Going back to the mechanics, yeah, I mean, that makes a huge difference. I had a teammate who was a bodybuilder. He used to run track. He was a football player. He had all these huge physical qualities and all that stuff. And then I had another teammate who was like a wet noodle, but he's the
mhm,
only one who went pro out of all of us. And when it came to a sporting task, the wet noodle was more athletic
mhm. Yep.
just because he coordinated his body properly, or like he did something that in the United States and England, for example, is very common. If you're going to go for a shoulder challenge, to just try to kill the other guy. And
Mhm,
he was so clever that he just used guile to solve a problem. For example, he would bait you into going for the shoulder charge, and then he would just like pull the rug out from under you. He would actually remove his shoulder,
mhm,
and you just fall to the ground. So
mhm,
there's times where you can just solve the problem that way, but you might just read the ball better, run in a straighter path to the ball as opposed to having this big looping curled run. The bodybuilder, if it was a straight line sprint, 100 yards, yeah, he'd do great. But if it was a
mhm.
change of direction, maybe you just take way too many steps and not actually be able to apply force into the ground at the right angle, orientation, stuff like that. And even with the rehab
For
kid that
sure.
I'm working with, I'm just teaching him on his acceleration. Like in soccer, maybe it's just 'cause there's like the fast footwork ball drills. I think there's this obsession with fast feet when it comes to acceleration,
Mhm,
change of direction, and I find it to be so
mhm,
wasteful. And if you
mhm.
took
Certainly.
longer strides and longer ground contact times, you might actually apply more force into the ground and accelerate better. So I say, get your knees, punch it through the plate of glass ahead of you, that kind of like concept. But
Mhm,
or
mhm,
even just on his lateral change of direction, I'll have a cone drill. He'll shuffle and I'll say, shuffle all the way outside the cone and then touch down to the cone, as opposed to like reaching outside to the cone. Then I want to go this way. Now I'm leaning in the
mhm.
wrong direction. Rather than go all the way across the cone, touch down, and then he's landing on the inside leg. His angles are a lot better to then, change direction. So
Exactly. No,
I appreciate
exactly.
you talking about that.
Yeah, I find it super important. I'm working with that on a daily basis, also with our rehab guys, just because they
Mhm,
have to re-coordinate themselves and learn how
mhm,
to change direction, accelerate, have top end speed. I was talking with a speed coach earlier because one of my guys is working with a true speed coach in the UK, and he said that some players ask me for speed, but they're fast already. Actually, what I'm coaching them is how to slow down because
okay,
they're doing is running too fast and they don't have control of the ball and they don't have the
yeah,
awareness around them to be able to really react in time. So a
mhm,
lot of times everybody wants to be faster, but at the end of the day, is fast always so good in a sports setting? I was seeing something at the combine. Everybody's trying to hit 4.43, 4.2, but who are the best receivers in the NFL? They're
mhm,
running 4.5s, and they look super fast on
mhm,
game speed
mhm,
because yeah, it's not all about just how fast can you run. It's about being able to adapt to a situation. And like if you're running 4.2, yeah, then you got to put the brakes on, and then yeah, that's going to be challenging if you don't have the proper mechanics and you don't really have that deceleration speed. That's why we can't focus on just straight line speed as
yeah,
a really important indicator of athletic performance, especially
mhm.
in field sports.
So I had this conversation with another coach where I was talking about the soft side versus the hard side of training. Hard side might be your grindy stuff, your max strength. Soft side might be your fluidity, your mobility, that kind of stuff.
Mhm,
And how some players would benefit if you're always stiff and you're on the hard side. Maybe you'd become a better athlete if you focus on the
mhm,
soft side. Maybe an NFL lineman would actually benefit from doing some of the more
mhm,
fluid stuff. And then maybe
mhm.
have your wet noodles, like I was saying, that could actually benefit from doing a squat with a little bit of weight every now and
Yeah,
then. And maybe
exactly.
the more resilient,
Yeah.
more powerful. But then as you're saying too, there's the perception side of things, there's the IQ side of things, there's the timing of things. And you see players like Zidane, you see players like Messi. I think of Pirlo, I think of Berbatov as like it's almost like they're
Mhm,
playing slower motion than everybody
mhm,
else. And there's
mhm,
actually a time where maybe deceleration is more important than acceleration. Some people would make fun of James Harden, for example, because he had a bit of a big belly. But then when he stopped, you'd see the other guy running and he'd just do a little shift, he'd get up his points. So is it truly all about outputs in all instances, being as fast as possible, being as strong as possible? That's not necessarily the case. You can be really, really big and strong and then be on 1 foot when someone hits you and they're on 2 feet. And then you're just
mhm.
off balance and you get knocked off the ball. So it's not, there's definitely the
Exactly.
skill aspect and IQ aspect. So is there anything that you've changed your mind on recently or during your career that like stands out to you?
Yeah, anything that I've changed my mind on in my career.
Mhm,
Yeah, like I used to be really like we talked about this a little bit already. I used to be a lot focused on kind of block periodization, and I just found that was the only way to really truly make gains, and I
mhm,
found that that just isn't the case. You
mhm,
can have undulating periodizations, you can use microdosing, you can use contrast training. You don't have to really have these block periodizations as you learn them in school, where you have to spend 6 to 8 weeks on max strength and don't expose them to any other type of strength quality. I've become much more supple in my way of training and my understanding of training. I've seen gains in one session. Of course, that you get super compensation in one session. And so if you're talking about, yeah, like you say, bodybuilders or people that are just focusing on getting stronger and that
mhm,
is their goal in their sports. But in one session, if you can get a guy feeling better mentally and physically and feeling
yeah,
more supple, feeling more athletic, feeling more confident, which is the most important thing in the end, then you're doing your job well. And I used to be much more rigid in my thought processes that if I'm not doing it as it says in the books, I'm not going to get results. Yeah, so that's probably one thing that I've changed my mind over time on.
Is there a misconception or like a myth that's surrounding the soccer training space that you definitely want to dispel?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when guys are injured, they have this like the fan base or the media people are saying, yeah, this guy's not working hard enough or he's
Yeah,
lazy, he's always injured. But there's so many players that get injured, unfortunately, that are working as hard as possible and are not that preconception is just in my mind it's I always think it's so bizarre to see people criticizing a player for getting injured. Of course, there's guys that don't work. There's so many guys that have injury bouts that are working hard. A lot of things are out of their control. There might be some of the hardest workers, but if they don't have a staff around them that understands load management, or as we've talked about, the match congestion is so high that can't be prevented, doesn't mean necessarily that they have a bad attitude or they're not hard workers. But you see that so often that players get criticized so quickly for getting injured.
mhm,
Like it's somehow their fault because they didn't work hard enough or they didn't take care of their bodies well enough. And of course,
mhm,
can be the case, but you see it so often. And I've been on the side of things where I can see actually what a player's program looks like. And
Mhm,
yeah, the player still gets injured and he's getting criticized for not having good habits or
mhm,
having a bad attitude when that's actually the furthest from the case a lot of the times. So it's a little bit less about specific training content, but just more
sure.
misconceptions that I see a lot of the times.
I think kind of along that too is if you ever see a player with all the free time that he might have outside of training because he can't train actually 8 hours a day. It's too much for the
Yep.
body to do every single day. If they have like a side venture, another interest, whether it's music or fashion, or they go on vacation
Mhm.
with their family, they also seem to get slandered a lot for being a bad pro, even though they
Yeah.
might be great in the dressing room, they might be great with the coach, they might be great on the field. So
Hmm.
I appreciate you saying that because yeah, you see a lot on Instagram or Twitter or something like that. Um, is there
Yeah. That's
a
a whole nother topic. Instagram and Twitter.
Is there, like, a positive change that you're noticing in the soccer training world?
I mean, I think that yeah, it's two-sided. I mean, you see people that are getting more exposed to strength,
Mhm,
but a lot of times, like I just said, they're getting exposed to the wrong methods
mhm,
from Instagram and from Twitter or whatever. They see exercise which they like to do, but I think there is a positive effect that people are becoming more aware
mhm,
of types of training and
mhm,
people can have information more readily available to them than before. I also think AI is a positive effect on this training space if you use it the right way, because
mhm,
in terms of data analysis, it
mhm,
helps me so much. But of course, you have to use that as a tool and not just use that to create total training programs or but so I
to
think AI.
replace your brain.
Yeah, exactly. You see that happening a lot as well. But I think the AI and technology, the accessibility of technology, like years ago, it would be unaffordable to have what we have, force plates and force
Mhm,
frames and all this kind of stuff. And now the accessibility of that, because the prices are going down, is definitely better than it was a few years ago. So I like to see that improvement in technology and that influx of technology, as long as it's used, as you described, also in the right way. But making things more objective through technology and through AI can certainly help the space, I think.
COVID has actually been a wonderful thing for my business because,
Mhm,
I started mobile training purely out of necessity because gyms weren't hiring, but then also what it's done for the home gym community is amazing, and then, like you're talking
mm,
about technology being more affordable, there's this company, OVR, they have timing gates, they have jump mats, they have all sorts of the
mm,
VBT devices, and it's way more affordable than, its competitors before.
mhm.
And I know it sounds like I'm selling them, I do have an affiliate link in the bio if anybody wants to buy stuff, but the last thing I was gonna say is, if you could give any final piece of advice about anything to anybody, what stands out?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of young colleagues, interns, and people that come to me and talk to me like, "What can I do to kind of get in your position?" And we have applicants coming in a lot. They have a lot of credentials. They have taken a lot of courses. They have a lot of knowledge. But my advice is always just get your hands-on experience, however
Mhm,
possible. Get yourself in the door somewhere and really get your hands-on experience with athletes. If you want to work it with top sport athletics, you have to get exposure to top sport athletics because there's just we've been talking about it the whole time. There's such a
mhm,
dynamic to it that you don't see in the books and
mhm,
you can't understand it until you're there and you see it how it's working, the politics involved with it, the business side of things, all of that stuff. You have to get that exposure and get athlete hours, get as many athlete hours as you can. That's
mhm,
the only way you're gonna develop your coaching eye, and you're gonna be able to see things in the gym that you wouldn't see after your first year out of school. So I think I told you that a long time ago as well. Get your exposure. Find an
mhm,
internship. Find some way to get your foot in the door if you haven't been able to follow a traditional track of university education and all of these kind of things. So that would be my advice. You have to put the person first as well. Science is great, objective things are great as well, but the way you find success as a coach is through connection with people.
mhm,
And don't forget that I've seen a lot of very smart, very educated coaches that can't get the same results as guys that are a little bit more, maybe a little bit more laid back, a little bit more fluid in the way that they work,
mhm,
not as rigid, but they make a connection with the player, and that at the end is going to get buy-in, and buy-in is what you're looking for to get
mhm,
results. And the heuristics of somebody, the character of
mhm.
somebody matters just as much as the knowledge and education of somebody, I think.
That is very practical advice. Well, I wanna thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Nice to see you and nice speaking with you.